Coming up on Choppers Politics.
Paul, has Theresa May ever even had a McDonald's?
Rishi Sunak presents his mini budget, although there's not much mini about spending £30 billion of your tax money on cutting stamp duty, VAT, and the cost of eating out. I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent, also known in Westminster as Chopper, and this is Chopper's Politics, your weekly guide to everything you need to know about how government works, politics, and beyond. You may be able to hear police sirens in the background because I'm here in the House of Commons this week. We have a plethora of guests coming up for you. I'll be speaking to Lord Howell of Guildford on whether the Commonwealth needs to apologise for its imperial past and the opportunities it has for the future. Plus Paul Harrison, former press secretary to Theresa May in number 10 Downing Street, on why Boris Johnson's decision to televise afternoon press conferences is a big risk, both for the government and for us journalists. But first, this week saw the Chancellor stand up in the House of Commons and give us his summer economic update, a boring name for basically a mini budget, a slew of measures to boost the economy to combat the damage done by the coronavirus pandemic. But will stamp duty holidays, VAT cuts, and eating out to help out be enough? With so much to talk about, we have to make sure we got some time with someone in the Treasury who knows just what's going on. And that person is Steve Barclay, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, number 2 to Rishi Sunak. Steve Barclay, welcome to Choppers Politics. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Chris.
We're all looking forward to the meals you'll be paying for us from next month, the Chancellor's Eat Out to Help Out scheme. Where's your first half-price meal?
Oh, it'll have to be in the constituency, of course. But it's about getting demand back. And obviously it's targeted Monday to Wednesday. And it reflects the fact that there's real concerns about the pressure on the hospitality sector. It's been particularly hit by COVID. A lot of young people within there, 2.4 million in the sector, 1.4 million of whom are being furloughed. Many of those are young people. So it's really important we get that demand back into our restaurants. And people often say they want the Treasury to be creative. Well, here's a good illustration of the Treasury responding to that with something that's new, it's different, but it helps get that demand back into the economy.
It's more than new, it's unique, according to the Chancellor in the House of Commons today. It's called the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. Whose idea was that?
Well, it's the Chancellor's announcement and the Chancellor's idea, and I think it's a very good one, and I think it's been warmly received from businesses, and there's real opportunity now for the listeners to Choppers Podcast to get out there to support local businesses throughout August, and I hope many of them will do so.
So you can't think of a restaurant you might be eating in the constituency when it starts?
There's one at the end of my road, so that's going to be a leading contender. But there's lots. If I start picking favourites, I might upset one or two of the local businesses. So, but the point is, this is an unlimited scheme. So part of it is there be scope to eat out on a regular basis. Yes,
your experienced local MP there, not favouring any one restaurant over the next one. Do you worry though that the plan might clash with the government's plans to get us eating less? Because if these big fast food chains hoover up government money, is that not against what the ideas are to stop eating the wrong foods?
No, I think this is a scheme for a month. It's a targeted measure. It's Monday to Wednesday. And throughout this, part of our approach has been to say, let's trust the British public. We trust them on guidelines. We trust employers and business owners to do the right thing by their customers. That's what they've done. They've really put a huge amount of effort into making their businesses COVID safe. And we need to now support them. We need to get people back into those businesses, but do it in a way where people enjoy summer, but in a safe manner.
Yeah, the government was looking at banning 2-for-1 deals last year. Doesn't this work against that? Or is the economy a bit more important than worrying about obesity right at the moment?
I think you've got to look at it in the round, Chris. I mean, we've got $2 billion going into walking and cycling. There's huge investment in our public services. There's an array of measures. But this is about saying economically, we recognise there's certain sectors that have been particularly hit. So the Prime Minister's announcement last week of accelerating infrastructure, the rebuilding programme for our schools, the investment in maintenance in our courts, our prisons, the rebuilding of hospitals, the 40 new hospitals, the maintenance programmes there. So the range of measures, the cut in stamp duty to get the house market moving. And alongside that, this is one of those measures targeted at the hospitality industry, alongside obviously the VAT cut, the 20% down to 5%. Yeah. Again, showing we've been listening to business, engaging with our business leaders and responding to their requests.
Well, just on that VAT reform, is it okay with the EU to cut VAT? I was always told, certainly by the Vote Leave campaign in 2016, that to leave the EU, that would let us cut VAT.
Well, it's about targeted measures and the circumstances, and this has gone through the church, as you would expect. I mean, there will be more freedoms, you're absolutely right, including, as the Chancellor said today, on procurement when we leave the EU. You don't need to, obviously, persuade me of the merits of leaving the EU. I'm very happy to talk at length about those, Chris, but today is more about the economy.
Another time, Steve.
It's another day. But I think the key thing really is that mix of protecting jobs, things like the bonus for furlough, supporting jobs, including if people leave the labour market, getting the doubling of job coaches, getting the skills, getting them back into there with a Kickstarter scheme targeted at young people, but also then creating jobs. And that's about the infrastructure, the maintenance programmes, accelerating the pace at which we do things, the planning reforms.
Yes.
So we actually build in response to this health pandemic.
Because we are part of the EU, aren't we, until the end of this year because of the transition period that you negotiated?
The transition runs until the end of the year, but then obviously we'll have greater discretion once we go into the new year. The question then is how we use that, but it's great to have those opportunities.
But it is allowed, though, isn't it, to cut VAT in a certain sector at the moment while we're part of the EU, or is it at risk of being said we can't do it by the EU?
No, within the Treasury lawyers, this has been looked at as part of the announcement.
The theme today was one of an interventionist, measures from Rishi Sunak, almost socialist. Are you happy about that, Steve Barclay?
It's about targeted measures, and I think what most independent commentators, including the OBR, the Governor of the Bank of England and others have said is the cost of inaction would be far greater than the measures we've set out. So yes, the sums are unprecedented. They reflect the global nature of this pandemic, but they're targeted, and it's to deal with this short period of huge pressure, not just on our health and our public services, but also on our economy, and to ensure we don't allow that to permanently scar the economy. And we were able to do it, Chris, because for the last decade, previous Treasury ministers before my time, but George Osborne, Philip Hammond and others, took tough decisions to get the deficit down from 10% to under 2%. And that, combined with obviously historically low interest rates, has enabled us to go to the markets, to have the confidence, therefore to borrow as we've needed to do to get through this health pandemic. But clearly in the autumn, we then, through the budget, need to look at the longer term fiscal sustainability and set a path as part of that third phase. But it's a three-phase approach. Deal with the lockdown and the pressure so that our NHS could be protected, we could save lives. Then to reopen the economy, which was what the Chancellor was addressing. And then we'll pick up the third phase in the autumn when the Chancellor sets out the budget.
Is that third phase one of tax increases?
Well, the key issue is to retain and protect as many jobs as possible. That's the best way of bouncing back. That's being behind the strategy with the furlough scheme, protecting over 9 million jobs, the self-employed income support scheme, the package of grants, tax deferrals, loans, the bounce back loans. It's all about how do we support viable businesses before this health pandemic so they can bounce back and do what they were doing before as viable businesses afterwards as well. The best way of doing that is retaining that link between the employee and their business. And now what we need to do is reopen our economy, give confidence to employers through the bonus to bring their furloughed staff back so we can bounce back. And that is the best way of going into the budget.
But you're not saying how we'll pay for this. I mean, for how long can we carry the borrowing required to fund all these measures?
Well, what I'm saying, Chris, is if we didn't take these measures, the cost would be greater because of the risk of permanent economic scarring, particularly for the young. You know, young people being out of the labour market for an extended period of time. All the studies show that really blights their longer term economic future and has real damage to the economy. So the cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of these measures. But it's because we've got low interest rates, it's because of the fiscally responsible decisions taken, getting the deficit down over the preceding decade, that we're able to do that. But of course, we will then, through the budget, you wouldn't expect me, Chris, to write the budget now, but the Chancellor will deal with that.
You can try.
And it's understandable to push, but that's the Chancellor's prerogative, and he will address that in the autumn.
Do you worry about weaning people off the public sector money teat, as it were? I mean, essentially, we have got a lot of money flowing from taxes paid by people back through the state into pockets. And it's difficult. Once people like getting half-price meals in August, they'll want those in September. They want to have free parking for NHS staff forever, probably. I mean, the easy bits are now. The hard stuff is coming, surely.
Well, I mean, the key way to address that is to reopen the economy and get people back into work, and to get different sectors motoring, such as our construction sector, get those infrastructure schemes underway. Maintenance programs are great because they're quick to deploy, so you can mobilise those very effectively. That's why we've targeted, for example, the hospitals program, the schools program, the courts, and so forth, because those are schemes one can accelerate and get jobs, help create jobs through those sectors. But these are measures to deal with a health pandemic. It's something that's impacting globally. We've got to address those, but do so in a way that doesn't cause permanent economic scarring.
Of course, but I wonder how you get off the drug of public money flowing into pockets. Do you worry about that's quite difficult to do?
Well, I mean, that's what we've got to address at the budget and the spending round. Through my role as Chief Secretary, that's a key focus of mine, is looking at the spending round and working with departments to set that course. And obviously, we'll say more about that in the autumn.
What sort of recovery are you expecting? Which letter do you stand behind? Is it W, V, U or L? Sadly, L is a bad one, of course.
Well, I'd leave that to others. I think the key thing is to focus on the delivery of the schemes, working with the departments, so ensuring we get the rollout of the work coaches, get the transport schemes up and running, get the construction schemes underway. So that's my key focus, rather than speculating on which letter of the alphabet is most applicable.
In terms of the changes to stamp duty, are we now on a road towards abolishing it altogether, do you think? Given that 500,000, if that carries on after next March, takes a lot of homes out of that bracket altogether?
Well, again, you skillfully, as ever, Chris, try and draw me into to a debate on the future budget and what tax measures we may or may not consider. And these are issues for the Chancellor and the team to consider in due course. But the point is that it's again being targeted in what was set out today. And we've had the first fall in house prices for 8 years. We know that a house building is a key sector. 240,000 people working in the house building, either directly or through contractors, but significantly a further 500 to 700,000 in the supportive industries to that. So it's a key sector, both in terms of building more homes and the 12 billion affordable homes programme that the Prime Minister confirmed, but also in terms of house sales. Because one of the things that's quite interesting is the first year after someone buys a house, there's a significant amount to spend. And again, that feeds through into local traders, into local shops. A forecast of up to 5% of the value can be sent in that first year. So quite significant spend. So it's important to get that part of the economy moving again.
The .gov.uk website announced these plans as Rishi's plans for jobs by his first name. It's like he's one of the Beatles or something, John, Paul, George and Ringo. I mean, what's it like working with this boy wonder?
Well, it's fantastic to work with the Chancellor, and I think people can see that what has shaped the approach he's taken has been his values, and he spoke about that in the Chamber. I think the public has seen that we've reacted quickly, the pace, the scale, the scope of the measures such as the furlough scheme delivered through fantastic work, and credit to the HMRC officials in particular that put that in place at real pace. The self-employed income support scheme was brought in early. And you and I know from my time on the Public Accounts Committee, not all government schemes are brought in early in that way. So there's been a real collective effort, great work by officials in HMRC and Treasury through the Chancellor's leadership. But what has really shaped that programme has been the values that he talked about today.
You weren't planning to be here, were you, when we started off as Chief Secretary to the Treasury after the election? You were planning, the spending review. Do you have any message for Whitehall? Because that's what people are looking at now. With the shrinking economy, that will mean big cuts going forward for departments.
A key interest of mine, as you know, is data, so quality of data and linking to outcomes. I think it's important that through the spending review, we're not simply looking at the inputs, what the spending envelope is, what the allocation, what the spread is over the scorecard. What is very interesting for me is how that links to delivering better outcomes, because I think for your listeners, for my constituents, that's what they want to see. They want to see schemes delivered. They want to see outcomes from that spend, which is their money. It's their taxpayers' money, and we should never forget that. And a key focus within the Treasury is looking at how we improve the quality of our data, in particular real-time data, how we use technology as part of that, and how we link that to much clearer outcomes.
OK, Steve Barclay. Well, on a busy day in Westminster, thank you so much for joining us today on Choppers Politics. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Right, stick around. In just a moment, we'll be talking about televised press briefings and revealing some of the more silly questions asked by my fellow journalists with former Downing Street Press Secretary Paul Harrison, right after this.
We're interrupting this podcast to bring you news of another Telegraph show we think you might like. It's called Planet Normal, and it's hosted by me, Liam Halligan.
And me, Alison Pearson. We're both Telegraph columnists who share the view that far too often those who shout the loudest on the telly just don't represent the views of normal people.
So take a trip with us to Planet Normal. We're joined by some stellar guests, well-known voices from politics, business and the arts.
All from different fields, but they have one thing in common. They're at the top of their game, but distinctly down to earth. The good news is I finally learnt what a podcast is and even how you subscribe to it. It's actually quite simple. Search for Planet Normal on your podcast app or click on the link in the show notes for this episode.
You don't really know what a podcast is, do you?
I am one. Look, I am one. Who needs to know what it is? I am one, okay? Shut up.
And we're back. Now, they became a feature of the day when you had nothing else to do during the coronavirus pandemic. I'm talking, of course, about the daily televised press briefing led by the PM or senior ministers from number 10 Downing Street. It was a step away from lobby journalists like myself questioning the PM's official spokesperson that still goes on, a civil servant, off camera every day. Well, the government enjoyed doing them, and they're so pleased they're going to start introducing daily televised press briefings later this year, similar to the format used by the White House. So what impact might this have on Westminster and on political reporting? I called up Paul Harrison, former Press Secretary to Theresa May when she was the Prime Minister, and he joins me now to discuss just that. Paul Harrison, you were Press Secretary to Theresa May. Did you ever think about putting someone up each day to answer questions from the media?
Not seriously, no. We were very much stuck in the Brexit mire when I was there. I'm not necessarily sure it would have helped. But there is an argument, I think, that given the way that the government has become more transparent with the press and the public over time, over a period of decades, maybe this is sort of the big next step. Maybe it is inevitable. I think circumstances just stopped us from entertaining it seriously. But it's an interesting idea. And I think like lots of people, I'm fascinated to see how it plays out.
But the way it works, I should say, I was lobby chairman last year when Paul worked in number 10 in part. So he and I talked quite a lot. But the way it works is there's a morning briefing and an afternoon briefing. And the morning one will still carry on. That'll be on the record, but behind closed doors. And the afternoon briefing will be in public. And I just wonder whether it might backfire, because my experience of covering political journalism over the past decade is that pressure can build through the day. So the afternoon one, it could get even worse than a morning briefing for the government.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely possible. There are a lot of risks involved here. I mean, the lucky thing, I suppose, is the guy who does the morning briefing, a guy called James Slack, the PM's official spokesman, is peerless in his brilliance. So he's unlikely to make anything worse in and of himself. But as you say, issues can elevate and, you know, from the government's point of view, get worse as the day goes on, definitely, as more information comes out. So there is definitely a chance that by the time you get to that afternoon briefing, the new person, whoever it is, finds himself under real pressure, but also on camera.
Yes, and you had names, didn't you, for different weeks when it was going well and badly back in number 10, didn't you?
Yeah, but it never felt really like it was going all that well. But generally speaking, it was sporty when it was kind of, you know, things weren't going perfectly, but we muddled along. But then choppy when things, when we were really under the pump, and both were kind of euphemistic given, I suppose, the amount of pressure we were under. Realistically, the pressure is different now. All governments feel under pressure, but obviously the current regime have all of our sympathies in that they're trying to deal with this totally unprecedented, once-in-a-century event.
I've been to enough of those lobby briefings when nothing's happening and you simply ask a question to get an answer. Do you have any favourite questions you've been asked?
I think one of the things that I'll be really sad if this new televised process inadvertently leads to is kind of the death of the irreverent question, because sometimes asking something that seems a bit left field or even oddball gives you answers that kind of reveal something. And ultimately, I guess you know a lot better than I do, but the process of journalism, in part for lobby journalists, kind of reveal a bit of the politicians that make the decisions on all our behalves for readers. And, there was a time when we were launching the childhood obesity strategy, sort of a variant of that, when I was in Number 10. And obviously there was a lot of focus on, are the measures disproportionate? Are you depriving people of choice? All that kind of stuff. And we had this briefing and I was taking it, and there was a lot of chat about all the measures and whether they were too draconian or whatever. And eventually a member of the lobby, who I won't name, just looked at me and said, "Paul, has Theresa May ever even had a McDonald's?" And I saw there had been a bit of speculation in that morning's papers about, the extent to which she's even never eaten any fast food, given her love of cooking. And so I actually asked her, and she sort of flashed a smile and said that she had, but the reason why was because she'd gone to officially open one in her constituency. So things like that.
And the obvious football questions always asked, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Theresa was a big cricket fan, and she's a member of the MCC now. Got in much faster than I'm currently trying to. But so during the World Cup, we were obviously at that stage doing quite well, and we had the semi-final with Croatia coming up, which I think we watched in Brussels because we were at some kind of European summit of some sort. Yeah, and so there was a question the days before that. Paul, does the PM think it's coming home? The death of the irreverent question, I think, like, genuinely would be a shame, because every now and again they do reveal something.
Do you think in any sense the lobby system works in terms of sharpening up Whitehall? Because I have been told that by some people in the morning before James Slack's briefing. He has to ask departments across Whitehall for briefings on the 5 or 6 big issues of the day. And that forces departments to answer questions quickly and to avoid putting James in a difficult spot in those meetings. So I wonder whether we forget that the discipline this system gives the government makes it better.
I think that's true. I mean, in some ways, it's a bit like a microcosm for PMQs in a way. PMQs is beneficial in that it means that the Prime Minister of the day, whoever it is, has to spend time knowing what is going on in his or her name in all of the departments in Whitehall. And, because when you're a spokesman for the PM, you are becoming, him or her in terms of the way you represent their views. You sort of similarly, although I don't liken it in terms of pressure, you kind of similarly have to be clued in. And I think there is also something in terms of the fact that press scrutiny sharpens you up in another way, in that it doesn't always work, obviously, but it's often the way that you sort of prevent stupid things from happening. So if somebody comes with a plan that from a policy perspective seems entirely logical, and then you say, yeah, the thing is though, the Telegraph headline the next day is going to be X, it gives a new sort of context to what you're doing, because ultimately good policy has to be good policy, but it also has to be explicable to the public, and it has to be able to be understood through the prism of the media.
Just going back to the plans that this government's got, why do you think they're doing it now? Is it because there aren't enough good ministers below Boris Johnson who can host that afternoon press conference convincingly?
I don't think so. I think the answer really, and the logic, is quite simple. When the government, in managing the initial phase of the coronavirus response, started to do the daily press conferences, they looked at the numbers of people who saw things from them. And I think the Downing Street estimate is that on a regular basis, something like 10 million people saw some content from those press conferences on certain days. And if you're a politician, the ability to communicate directly your government's message is just unbelievably seductive. Because in a way, you can kind of strip out some of that interpretation that different newspapers or broadcasters will put on what you say. You can say it in your own words. And so that's the big appeal, the idea that you can communicate directly with voters and try and get across your message. There is obviously a potential downside, which we've talked about. Ultimately, there will be some days where you haven't got a good news story and you don't have a great deal to say, and your message is here, there, and everywhere. But you're also obligated to put someone up, and you're under pressure on something that you don't really want to talk about. Those briefings that we've discussed, and you've seen me squirm, Chris, on a number of occasions where on a difficult wicket. it will look better for the government if on those days they didn't have to front someone up on camera. But, that's the other half of the deal. Yeah. That's what they'll have to do.
Will you be applying?
I won't, I don't think. I'm certainly sure I wouldn't be asked, but it will be fascinating to see who they get. The rumour is that number 10 would like it to be a woman. It's a seductive job. I don't know whether sort of, Chris, as a journalist, you see that many of your colleagues who'd be eager to sort of join the dark side.
I don't know. I think it'd be a job where you'd get instant fame, notoriety. You are the voice explaining the government. I was struck by the first question to the new White House comms chief, the new White House press secretary, from one of the journalists was, will you ever lie for the government? Which I thought was quite a question. I mean, crumbs. The person doing that job will become, as you say, instantaneously the face of the government.
Yeah, this, unlike, I think, any comms job that's really happened in government in this country before, will actually change your identity. So you will become a visualization of Boris's government. It's possible that someone might shout at you on the tube, which, obviously never happened to me because no one really knew what I looked like. But it's a big old undertaking. The interesting thing, too, is that the public will get to see the questions that journalists ask as well. So if you're watching that press briefing, not only are you seeing how the sausages are made, but you get a bit of an insight into how the media works as well. And so there's kind of transparency on two sides, and as well as the public being able to, and make a judgment about, is this Boris Johnson spokesperson actually answering the questions, or are they dodging them? They'll also be able to say, are the journalists getting the sort of information that I'm interested in? So it'll be an insight into both sides of the machine, which is another reason why it'll be fascinating.
Paul Harrison, former press secretary at 10 Downing Street, thank you so much for coming on Choppers Politics.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Now, Britain's relationship with its past is under close scrutiny because of the movement called Black Lives Matter. And this week, Prince Harry said that the uncomfortable history of the Commonwealth had to be addressed in a video with the Duchess of Cambridge from their home in LA.
Certainly when you look across the Commonwealth, there's no way that we can move forward unless we acknowledge the past. And I think so many people have done such an amazing, incredible job of acknowledging the past and trying to right those wrongs. But I think we all acknowledge on here that there is so much more still to do. It's not going to be easy, and in some cases it's not going to be comfortable, but it needs to be done because guess what? Everybody benefits.
Very interesting comments there. Lord Howell of Guildford is a hugely experienced politician, having served as a minister in Margaret Thatcher's government in the 80s and David Cameron's government in the first part of this century. He's also an enthusiast for the Commonwealth and all it has to offer as president of the Royal Commonwealth Society. Lord Howell of Guildford, welcome to Choppers Politics. Thank you for coming on. Of course, I know you as a former minister in the coalition government, but more interestingly for a lot of people, you're also president of the Royal Commonwealth Society and a long-time champion of the value of the Commonwealth, which many think after Brexit will have a bigger impact on the UK. I want to ask you firstly about Prince Harry's comments. He said in this interview that the UK should acknowledge the history of the Commonwealth, even if it's a bit uncomfortable. What did he mean?
Well, I think my comment on that would be there's plenty of history, and indeed bad history, to acknowledge in the former empire, indeed in all empires. Actually, the British Empire has possibly got less bad features than some others, but all empires have got very nasty aspects to them. And of course, the British Empire wasn't free of some very serious deficiencies, although it's always worth reminding people that although we deeply got our fingers in the slave trade way back, we were also the country that led the way to abolish the slave trade, at least in the West. But anyway, so there obviously are bad things of the past that we have to recognize. Now, do you attribute those to empire or to Commonwealth? I think it's just worth remembering that the Commonwealth was an ending device, if you like, winding up the empire or winding down the empire. And the idea was that there would be a voluntary coming together of those countries that wished and didn't feel too antagonistic or angry or furious about the past, and join together in repairing, in putting pressure on to repair some of the bad aspects of the past and some of the abuses and atrocities and all the rest. And the Commonwealth was really, in its new form, ceasing to be the British Commonwealth and becoming the Commonwealth was a brilliant way of moving out of empire. And I would challenge all historians to tell me a better ending to any empire in history than the way that we managed the ending of our empire. So the Commonwealth is still there and inherited a lot of problems, but also it inherited an organizational system to begin to overcome all these problems. And that's where the good side is, and that's what I would emphasize.
Of course you would, as president of the Royal Commonwealth Society. Is there a formal review underway looking at the history of the empire by the Commonwealth? Is that happening? Others are reviewing statues, memorials, paintings.
The pressure groups inside today's Commonwealth for gender equality, for still, alas, in the modern world there is slavery, as we very well know, of various sorts, not just in some Commonwealth countries, but in many other countries as well. But the pressure for gender equality, for respect for minorities, for human rights in all forms, for digging out some of the worst blemishes of the past. These things, the pressure is there all the time, and it's more so amongst the 54, not least because of their organisations at non-governmental level and through the Charter and so on. The pressure is there all the time to dig these things out, and I think the Commonwealth is a very good setup in which this pressure can be constantly and continuously mobilised.
Do you think the Queen was happy with Prince Harry's comments?
I absolutely no. I think she fully understood the context, and I mean he's been very active and committed to Commonwealth activities. He's a real champion of the Commonwealth, and I think he was trying to explain to the younger members of the Commonwealth, outside government, this was informally, where we're going. I would have thought she understood it fully, frankly.
Do you think we should be embarrassed about the empire, modern-day Britons, or recognise that it was a good and a bad thing?
Well, it's a good and a bad. It's an absolute balance, isn't it? I think we should be slightly embarrassed for those who say it was all absolutely wonderful, and anyone who criticises it doesn't know what they're talking about. We should be embarrassed of those sort of people. And at the other extreme, we should be embarrassed of people saying, oh, it was all a terrible thing, oppression on all sides, and ghastly atrocities, and emphasising the really bad points like Amritsar and so on. We should be just as embarrassed about them, because both views are completely unbalanced.
Is there a chance, you think, that the Commonwealth will assume a new role post-Brexit as a new kind of network of like-minded countries with a central theme of the Queen as head of state?
I think it's about to take another surge forward. Yes, the story of the Commonwealth began in 1949 with the absolutely crucial decision of India under Nehru to join the Commonwealth, even though it was a republic and not a realm. About 16 of the 54 countries are actually ones of which the Queen is the Queen, although she's the head of the whole Commonwealth as well. Today's Commonwealth is completely different to that. Today's Commonwealth is, 54 countries instead of 8 or 15. And now I think after the pandemic, as it emerges the pandemic, it's going to be different again. And I think there's a golden opportunity for Britain to play a part in making that difference.
I was going to ask you, in terms of the future of the head of the Commonwealth, it was confirmed in 2018 that Prince Charles will be the head of the Commonwealth, but don't you think the Commonwealth itself missed a trick by giving that role to Prince Charles? If they'd given it to one of the other member states, that would have been a different way of addressing the future, and it would be in a sense that, the UK allowing someone else to step forward.
No, I think it was rather clever that really to go against the sort of fashionable instinct that we can't have a monarchical figure at the head of it, because, of course, the one kind of figure that is free of all the politics and pressures and the inevitable jealousies and rivalries. I mean, let's face it, some of the Commonwealth countries are at each other's throats. The way of riding above that will be to have a monarchical figure at the top, so I think that was clever. Secondly, although, of course, the throne and the royalty are completely impartial, they can quietly, and are, I suspect, quietly going on with constant networking and backtrack diplomacy of a kind that never gets into the media and the papers, but actually keeps a sort of fresh contact between governments, interests, and even heads of governments all the time, every day, which we don't fully appreciate. They've just postponed the heads of government meeting for a year, so there's another year of the chair for Britain. And we have got here, I think, an important opportunity to reset or revision the Commonwealth in the post-pandemic era. And we've just joined the DFID and the FCO together. So we've got a huge international department with vast resources and enormous expertise on Commonwealth issues. And this is, I think, a golden moment for for the chair taking not a sort of dominant and we know best British lead, but a membership contributing lead to how we think the modern network Commonwealth, and it is a network, can really play a part in benefiting both our own country, why not, and world stability generally, as the world changes and the West changes and Asia arises and so on. It's a new scene, and we could paint up a new Commonwealth in it.
Do you think that the Foreign Office is ready for that? Of course, it's called the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, but to many, the Commonwealth has taken quite a back seat, almost an embarrassment for officials in the Foreign Office. Do you think it is, in that sense, has been true? I know you were a minister in Margaret Thatcher's government and David Cameron's government, so you experienced it inside and outside.
Oh, without a doubt, we played the Commonwealth card very poorly indeed. It was only the constant perception and wisdom of particularly the Queen, but some other people as well, that kept alive over the years the fact that there was a Commonwealth network, that it would one day be real friends, and we'd need the great new markets of Asia and Africa, and that the world didn't just end at the edges of the European Union. So that was 40 years of wandering in the wilderness in a way. And now, after Brexit, I think the penny began to drop, particularly in the Foreign Office. And I think it is beginning to be grasped that when we talk about old links and new ties, old allies and new partnerships, we are talking about re-engaging with the Commonwealth on a really intensive scale, because there's some very big players in there. There are a lot of small countries as well, and a lot of peoples and societies which are in real need. But there is a very powerful network there, and it's going to be very important to us and our trade.
Lord Howell, thank you so much for coming on Choppers Politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to all my guests this week, Steve Barclay, David Howell and Paul Harrison. Thank you to my producers, Louisa Wells and Elliot Lampitt. But most importantly of all, and I mean this, thank you to you for listening. This week, a listener called Queen T left a review on Apple Podcasts saying, I started listening to get an alternative view and I voted Remain. I've stayed as the radio guest is good and Chopper is a great host. Well, thank you so much, Your Majesty. Leaving ratings and reviews helps other listeners find this podcast. It's so appreciated. I can't thank you enough. And if I could meet you, I would buy you some tea, Queen Tea. If this podcast has left you hungry for more top-rate political analysis, go to telegraph.co.uk/chopper, where listeners get 30 days free access to all of our best coronavirus coverage, opinions, sport, politics, culture, and more, all totally free of charge. And if you can, and it's safe to do so, please buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph. Until next time, from Westminster, cheerio!